just such a powerful piece visually. And just also really, you can tell just how many different types of disciplines it brings together. It's got vieux glomisé, so gilt glass. You've got the carved frame around it. And then you've got the embroidered flowers. I mean, it's just so compelling as a piece. Welcome back to Artfully Crafted. My name is Alienor, and each week I travel to a craftsperson's studio, interview them, and show you their work. This week, we're going to the Sarabande Foundation to meet sculptor Jo Grogan. I first came across her work on Instagram, where a Rococo mirror she had made caught my attention. It was for her degree show at the City and Guilds Art School, and it brought together multiple disciplines: carving, gilding, verre glomisé, and embroidery. Hi Jo.
Hello.
Thank you so much for making time for this. I know you've got an insanely busy schedule at the moment, which we'll get into. But let's start with this intriguing backdrop that we've got here, because it's clearly not a working studio.
Oh, I just made this.
Yeah. There you go. So
I wish I could make that. Oh my God. A carver I am, a joiner I am not. So we are here at Sarabande, which is a foundation that was set up by Lee Alexander McQueen, who actually donated his entire estate to supporting the next generation of craftspeople and artists. I'm really fortunate to be here. I'm actually in my second year of residency. So I joined Sarabande in November of 2023. And yeah, I have been extended for another year. So it's a wonderful foundation. It's definitely, I think, changed my trajectory of my practice and certainly my kind of creative and artistic development. Yeah. It's a wonderful place to be in, with lots of different artists, lots of different disciplines. I think when I first found out that I had the residency here, well, first of all, I was in total shock, because I genuinely, and I know everyone always says that, it's like, oh, I didn't think I got it. And it was like, no, but I genuinely didn't. I think I went home and after the interview and sat in a dark room for the afternoon, just like, but I did, and yeah.
And then you found out that you did get in.
Yeah, and then obviously, because then it swaps from one fear of not getting it to another fear of then actually getting it. And then being like, oh God, what happens if I don't fit in, if I'm not arty enough? And I felt really intimidated, because I'd seen some of the alumni and the people that have been here, and I was really blown away. And then I came and met. I joined an artist crit in the Tottenham residence, because we've got two sites, Haggerston and Tottenham, with a couple of the artists there, and I met them and they were just so lovely. George and John, just so lovely. And I was like, oh, it's fine. I'll be fine. They're dead nice.
So we are in the meeting room, because you've got a really beautiful studio filled with wonderful things that you've made, but it was just a little bit too narrow for us to be able to get, the angle and the depth. So they very kindly allowed us to film in here, and then we'll be showing your studio as well alongside this. Could you tell us a little bit about what you do and the materials that you work in? Because there's, when we were sort of prepping this interview, you gave, I basically ended up with a list as long as my arm for disciplines that you work in, which actually is quite you know, almost intimidating, because I'm like, we could take this in so many different directions. It's incredible. But I'll let you make that introduction.
Just love using my hands. So I am a classically trained woodcarver and sculptor. And so I primarily work in wood, carving by hand, using methods and techniques that have been kind of used for hundreds of years. So I use mallets, chisels, and really the last kind of year and a half since I've been at Sarabande has been about me developing my creative direction for my work. So I always knew when I joined City and Guilds that I wanted to learn the technical kind of nuts and bolts of how to carve traditionally. Many reasons for why I wanted to do that, but the course is very technical, which it should be. So it gives you a really good foundation of knowledge and understanding of lots of the historical context, architectural and decorative, ornamental history, and then how to kind of approach. I mean, it used to take people 7 years to learn how to carve in an apprenticeship, and City and Guilds cram as much as they can into 3. Right. And carving, like a lot of creative pursuits, is something that you never stop learning. So that's the real underpinning of my work. But I came out and I knew I had to find what I wanted to do with these skills. I knew that I didn't necessarily want to go into restoration or conservation. For me, I wanted to use what I had learned, but find a way of creating more of an artistic practice with those skills. I feel like there's a lot of ancient kind of craft disciplines which have made a really good job of bridging the gap between kind of the past and the present. So if you look at textiles, ceramics, glass, you know, some of those are still underpinned with these ancient kind of methods, but a lot of artists who are working in those materials now have developed very contemporary interpretations that feel relevant, that feel accessible. And I feel with wood carving, which is different from things like wood turning as well, but actually wood carving, especially by hand, it can just feel quite stuck in the past. It just feels like there's a bit of a gap. And I'm not saying by any means that there's not people doing interesting things with working with wood as a medium. There's a lot of artists who work with wood as a medium, but I'm specifically talking about employing the disciplines of hand carving. So yeah, that is the root and the core.
So you wanted to use the traditional training, but then find a contemporary way of expressing that training.
Yeah, and I think, you know, it's funny because I'd kind of left. I graduated at the end of June in 23 from my course, and I kind of had an idea of where I wanted to go, but everything was a bit hazy, didn't really know how to get there or how to evolve my practice. I knew that I needed to find a core of what it was that I wanted to do. And it was actually when I came to Sarabande for my interview, and Trino said to me, she was like, "Who are you?" And, you know, I was just totally honest. I went, "I actually don't know at the minute. I don't know."
Yeah.
And it was great because it really sparked the fire that I needed. And after that interview, I spent about 2 months, and I went away and I actually did a lot of reading, because I was like, if I'm going to figure any of this out, I need to figure out what it is that I want to say, what it is that's driving me, and why I want to make whatever it is that I want to make. Like, what is your root? And a lot of it actually ended up going back to Liverpool. A lot of it came from where I was from, and I think it was always there. It was always there, but I just never really embraced it. Like, I look at myself even when I did fashion, and I used to love, like, really over the top, I think you could call it quite trashy, fashion. Like, I absolutely adored Thierry Mugler. Like, he was like my favourite. And at the time that I was starting fashion, he was kind of like frowned upon it because it wasn't looked at as being very tasteful. It's probably come back around now. And so I'd always like almost notoriously kind of had what I'd probably call quite bad taste. But in that, I think I'd always felt this battle and this rejection in it because I was aware that it was. And actually, I realised that, no, I actually wanted to embrace that. Because I think it was my friend Matt, who's from Sheffield, and he's incredible. And he brought to my attention the work of a French philosopher. And his theory was called Pierre Bourdieu. I might be saying that wrong. You're French, you can correct me. You have to excuse me butchering other people's languages. And, you know, his philosophy was how much our environments impact us and our environments develop us in terms of things like our levels of taste. And a lot of that resonated with me. Also the work of people like Walter Benjamin and an amazing director called Terence Davis, who was from Liverpool, who created a film called Of Time in the City, which was, as he calls it, a love letter to Liverpool. And it was footage of post-industrial Liverpool. But, you know, it could have been of many cities throughout the whole of the UK, especially in the north. And it was so powerful. And I found what it was. I found my reason for creating what I do.
So what is that reason?
I've always been fascinated by history. I've always loved history. It weirdly comforts me in helping me to understand the world that we live in today, even though it's horrific in many ways. But there's always an element of hope, and there's always an element of lightness. And, you know, I think a common theme within my work is humour. And I think there's a real value to that in times of hardship. And growing up in Liverpool, you know, humour is like an armour to a lot of people in the city. It's embraced and it's shielded, and there's a lot of power in it. And I think it helps a lot of people globally get through genuinely difficult times.
Yeah. So you're sort of responding to history, responding to the now, and kind of responding to that through art and through humour. Yeah.
And a lot of my work it's so multi-layered, and where I get, it's like I go on like a little journey of kind of picking little bits and pieces, and suddenly it'll build this picture and it'll make it complete, and it just suddenly makes sense. And the truth is, I don't care if nobody else sees that. I'm not going to tell anybody else kind of, you know, oh, you need to know this movement, or you need to know this historical context, or this philosopher to understand what I do, because art can feel really inexclusive, really elitist. Yeah. That's not why I make what I make. But when I am developing ideas and creations, the substance matters to me, because the substance is what builds it and what enables me to actually develop it. So, yeah, a lot of my work talks about social cultural history. There's lots of references to the work of people, really, that history often overlooks. So the work of women, the work of marginalised people and groups, and just some of the stories of everyday people. And it's interesting coming from now a crafts background, and entering something like art, because there's still a big division there. I'm constantly feel like people are trying to find what box I fit in. And the truth is, I don't fit in any. I don't consider myself just a crafts person, and there's nothing wrong, by the way, with anyone who does. It's almost like my work has more concept and maybe isn't as materials focused enough to be fully endorsed by that camp. But I also don't fit in fine art world because I'm not academic enough. So I kind of sway in this gap, and I think, especially in this last year and a half, for me, it's been about reframing what that is. So instead of going, oh, I'm in a gap and I feel a bit lost and, you know, I don't fit in this, and I'm kind of like, well, that is, that, you know, whatever that is, that's where I belong. and I'm okay with that. And I think throughout, you know, working in fashion, you get categorised there, and people kind of want to put you into little boxes. You know, even in, you know, the breadth of women's wear, it's like, oh, would you do outerwear or do you do soft separates? And it's like, well, I you know, and I did all apart from knitwear. Can't do knitwear to save my life. So yeah.
So I feel like this is the perfect way to bring in, you know, you talked about what you do now, but you had a whole first career. And what was, so you've talked about the fact that it was fashion. You know, what was your entry into that?
So I did a foundation course in Liverpool in the late 90s, and this was pre-digital. Fantastic. Didn't even know what the internet was. And so there was kind of 4 main areas of interest. So one was kind of graphics, which was very kind of typography heavy, which didn't really appeal to me. One was fine art, which I was terrified of and just thought I wasn't clever enough for. And then...
Sorry. Given what you've like all of the things that you just said, and then you just dropped, I wasn't clever enough for, and I'm like, what?
Well, I mean, it's so funny because I still don't really consider myself to be even now. But back then, I think a lot of my hang-ups came from the fact, I left school, I didn't have great GCSEs, and I didn't do any A-levels.
Right.
So I just felt, I've always loved art. All I did from being a kid was draw and make things. Luckily, my parents, which is miraculous really, didn't give me that much of a hard time in going, you know, I mean, they made me resit my maths GCSE 3 times and I failed all 3. So I will say that.
Oh my God.
And then they were like, all right, you are really bad. We won't make you do it 4. So yeah. But when it came to my A-levels, I just wanted to do art.
That must be really terrifying to have to sit it 3 times. Oh,
it's the fact I got progressively worse.
Oh, I kind of want to like find like a young Jo and like give her a hug, you know?
Yeah.
Oh.
Me too.
Because it's just like some people just like it doesn't gel with them, you know? And that's okay.
No, absolutely not. But my parents, I mean, I get it. To them, they were like, "You're gonna need it,"
yeah.
You know, because that's what was drilled into them.
And it's still drilled.
Yeah.
Into, you know, now it's like STEM is the word that, you know, everyone's pushing that.
Yeah. Academia will always have, you know, a higher weight of social standing, really. So, you know, my parents...
Up to a point, I find. It's quite interesting.
Yeah.
Because you do get like a few people who manage to break out of that. And then, you know, when you find some people who have such clout in the art world that actually they transcend any kind of scientist. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So it's quite interesting.
Yeah.
But anyway, so you were considering sort of what kind of category of art you might fit into.
Yeah, and I just, I always say I fell into fashion because it really started from my foundation course and I got a taster of it and it was like, okay, I'll go and do a degree in that. Again, my parents didn't have degrees, so they were really encouraging of my sister and I having that opportunity. Luckily at the time it was, you know, I think my sister's 2 years older, so she actually studied without any student fee, without a tuition fee. She did her degree without any. And I think mine was the first year that they introduced the tuition fee, but it was $2,000, it was $2,500. It was a lot different.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I went and studied in Northumbria University. I did fashion design degree. At the time, it was probably the best university in the north, but it was hard to compete with a lot of the southern institutes. You know, there is a bias. You're not taken as seriously as going somewhere like CSM or, you know, Kingston or Ravensbourne. And so yeah, as soon as I graduated, I knew that I'd have to move to London. I think obviously, you know, I'm talking, this was 25 years ago.
Yeah, because nowadays I would think like Manchester would also be like...
Yeah. And
but at the time,
the
it was very
Northeast
much
as well.
like London was the place for fashion, right?
Yeah, it was pretty much the only place that I could get a job. So yeah, I moved on, straight away. And yeah, spent over 20 years. I think I spent the first 10 years kind of mainly doing women's wear. Mm-hmm. I've worked a little bit in luxury level, but mainly all commercial, kind of high street.
Yeah.
I've lived in Australia, lived in Melbourne, lived in New York for a bit, lived in Shanghai for a bit. Yeah. Made some of the most amazing friends you could ever wish to meet, who are still very dear to me.
I mean, that actually sounds, the way you're telling it, it sounds incredible. It sounds super positive. Sounds like a success story of, first of my family to go to uni, like went there, moved to London, travelled to all of these places, met some great people. Yeah. But there's obviously another side to the coin, otherwise you would still be in that industry, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I just didn't, even from when I very first started, I didn't really feel like I fitted in. I was very nervous, I was always very anxious. I had no confidence whatsoever. And I was just super intimidated. Mm-hmm. And I think it can be a really, really harsh environment for people who aren't so self-assured. And I just got swallowed up. And certain instances you're made to feel like you're disposable. Like, you need to work and you need to not stop working and we own you and you need to do whatever we say. Because if you don't, I've got a line of another 1,000 people who can replace you, and I can replace you like that. So you just get used to a pattern of kind of conforming.
It's like that Devil Wears Prada quote, 1,000 girls would kill for this job. And it's, it's true. Yeah. And that's also the problem, that's the reason why the unpaid internships have carried on, because there are hundreds of people who would just take it up and who have the support to be able to accept it.
Yeah, and I think if you're in a position where you can, that's great. But the reality is, for a lot of people, that is not an option. Coming from the north, not having family in the south who you can live with or stay with to allow you to be able to do that, so you've got your rent. London probably still has, but certainly at that time had the highest amount in rent. Yeah. It just didn't equate. So it just made it, your entry to these creative industries is so much more of a battle.
Yeah, you're starting on the back foot from the start line.
I always say it's like, it can feel like other people's Snowdonia is your Everest. It's an unequal playing field, and I am very passionate about that, and I'm still very passionate about talking about it, because it's actually gotten worse in my lifetime. I think a recent statistic was the amount of people from a working class background entering the arts has reduced by 40% since the 70s. Yeah. And I actually have volunteered for a charity called Art Emergency, which are fantastic, and they offer mentoring to young people to try and deal with some of that inequality. So I am extremely passionate about that, because if, the truth is I've managed to retrain, which, trust me, as we'll go into, wasn't easy, but I've still managed to do it. But if I was a young person now trying to go through the system, the chances are I wouldn't be able to do it. And it pains me that there's probably a lot of extremely talented young people or people of all ages out there who just don't have access to entering the creative industry.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not something we can solve in one interview, but we can certainly give it airtime, and because I think people think it's gotten better, but it just hasn't.
No, it hasn't.
We're going backwards.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I feel like we're kind of getting to that moment of explaining the sort of like bubbling up emotionally of how you felt about the fashion world and kind of what drove the change. And I guess at the time you might have known what that change was going to be towards, but you felt that change was needed, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I just, especially the last 10 years of my career, I think I had this, like, it started as a very silent alarm, like a little, like a little whimper inside, like, I've had enough. But I think I'd just gotten so used to just overriding it, like suppressing it, like, no, you know, it's those voices, isn't it? Again, you know, my parents only ever wanted the best for me, but, you know, I remember a time, especially when I first moved to London and started working, I think I called them every night for 6 months crying.
Yeah.
And my mum, and I love my mum. My mum is a nurse in a kids' hospital. That's what she did for her life.
Yeah.
And I remember her saying to me in the nicest way, she went, Jo, I'm sorry. She was like, but this is life. And in a way, I'm kind of pleased that she did, because, you know, it is life, and we can't always do what we want, and, you know, we're not all in privileged positions. So there is that kind of, you've got to get on and you've got to work hard.
Yeah.
So I'm really glad that my parents kind of embedded like a good work ethic in me. But at the same time, you know, I remember having a really bad time in one particular job and calling them up and being like, oh, you know, I don't think they realised it was as bad as it was, because I wasn't telling them everything. But, you know, they were like, you don't leave a job before you've got another one lined up. You know, it was that very... and so I think I just convinced myself that not to dream, you know, not to be too ambitious, kind of stay in your lane, keep your head down, work hard, do whatever you're told to do, never question it. And I just kind of tracked on, and then before I knew it, I'd felt trapped. I was on this hamster wheel and I couldn't get off. And inside, everything started bubbling up, you know, and a lot of things. And I couldn't kind of process them or get my head around what was happening. And then, it got to kind of 2019, and I think it no longer felt like a choice. And that's the difference, where the alarm is sounding so loud that it's deafening.
Yeah.
And
it's not a whimper anymore.
No, it's a cry, it's a scream, it's everything. And I realised that, you know, I'd kind of gotten to stages of being both physically and mentally unwell, doing what I was doing, and just kind of going, enough, you know, I don't know how you're going to do it, but you need to face that you are going to have to make a change.
Do you think that's also because of the changing landscape of the fashion industry as a whole, or was it more just like your personal experience and your personal interactions with people, it had all just like piled up and become too much, like, or maybe a bit of both, I guess?
It was definitely a bit of both. I think, you know, the last 10 years of my career, the fashion industry, the sector that I worked in, the commercial sector, had shifted quite enormously. The cycles of production had sped up exponentially, and effectively, you know, as far as I'm concerned, we're squeezing the design process out of the cycle. So there was becoming less and less time to develop products, and product felt like it had less and less integrity, and that bothered me. And the way in which product was being made, you know, and then, you know, having the resounding backdrop of the climate crisis, which is very real, seeing, you know, the piles and mountains of clothing in Peru, and, you know, entire lakes that have been drained to produce cotton. And, you know, fashion is the second biggest polluting industry on the planet. Let's not pretend that that isn't enormous, and it's not a problem. And I am someone who cares very, very deeply about nature, about our environment, about our planet, about animals, about people, about people's welfare and well-being. And I struggled with it. I struggled with, ultimately, at times, you know, if we're going to be totally brutally honest, creating landfill. And that's not to bag anybody else who's in the industry. It's not to kind of push and poke. It's complex. There's a lot of moving parts.
But you felt that that's what you were doing?
you know, it wasn't even just a feeling, it was a reality. That is what I was doing. And I knew I was just a tiny cog in this big machine. But for my own well-being, I couldn't even be that.
My God, like, you're going to make me cry. My bloody hell.
Aww.
This is, yeah, like...
I cried a lot.
Sorry.
No.
Yeah.
But, and then, you know, and I felt trapped. Like,
yeah.
I didn't know how to get out of that. And that feeling of suffocating.
Yeah.
Of having these feelings, you know, I couldn't sleep. And yet feeling so trapped, because it was like, you stop this, what on earth are you going to do? How are you going to pay your rent?
Yeah. Yeah, so on one hand, it's like feeling like you need to get out, but also not knowing how or where to, I guess.
Yeah.
Gosh. Yeah, where do we even go from here? Okay, let's go to something positive so I don't end up sobbing my way through the interview, because clearly my emotional threshold today is like not where it needs to be.
I was going to say, I'll get me violin.
Okay, so you're at your wit's end, you don't want to do this anymore, and you said you get to that point, it's around 2019, right? Mm-hmm. And you've been working for 20 years and a change needs to happen, and enters, you know, you said to me off camera that there were a couple of events that were pivotal. So let's go into those.
So the first one was a friend of mine called Rachel Taylor, who is a fine jewellery journalist, held a panel talk. And on that panel, it was in the Goldsmith Centre, and on the panel was a jeweller and hand engraver called Castro Smith. And I was just really enamoured by his work. The fact that he was taking this traditional craft, but he'd managed to imprint such a strong aesthetic that was very unique, very much his own, kind of reinvigorated, I guess, something inside me, and this notion of taking traditional handcrafts but imprinting kind of something new, developing them, evolving them. And I guess that like little Jo was in me going, oh yeah,
I love that.
You like using your hands, cooey. And so I was like, you know, that is true. I do like using my hands, actually. I really do. So I was like, okay. And so that kind of like started something. And then September that year, I attended a QEST talk at the V&A Museum. And at that time, I didn't know anything really about QEST. I didn't know who they were. And it was on British craftsmanship. And it was like a 4-person panel, and they had a stone carver and a wood carver, who was Zoe Wilson and Amelia Crowley-Roth. And they were both women. And they both trained at City and Guilds Art School. And I literally sat there, I was on my own, and the hairs on my arm kind of stood up, and I felt really emotional. I had a little you moment. And
oh God, so we're not getting away from emotion.
Emotion's
what am I going to do?
I'm all for it. And so I did. I felt really like taken aback in a really good way, and felt like quite teary and just like really in awe of what they were doing. And so I was like, what is this City and Guilds place? Never heard of it. So the next day, I think I Googled it and saw they had an open day in a couple of weeks' time. So I took myself off and, effectively as soon as I walked into the carving department, I just fell in love. I was just absolutely blown away. I was mesmerised with the place. It is phenomenal. And I kind of said to myself then, I don't know how you're going to do it, but you've got to come here.
So basically fear and just all of those negative emotions were instantly replaced by just a sense of direction and a drive.
Yeah.
And that's really, I mean, life sometimes, things just align in such a wonderful way. And I mean, obviously, at that point, you've just described that you went through 20 years of not feeling aligned with yourself and who you were and what your values were. But then all of a sudden, in the space of just one talk, you're being introduced to like the pinnacle of British crafts, V&A, QEST, City and Guilds, all in one place. I mean, what a launching pad, like that's... Yeah.
And it's so strange looking back now, knowing, these... Obviously, I'd always known the V&A, but not as intimately as I do now. And just the sheer kind of almost blissful, oblivious... ignorance, to what these places...
Or naivety, maybe.
No, it really was, to what these places and institutions were and what they did and what they offered and how integral they'd become to me connecting, not just like training or, evolving a different career, but actually integrally changing me as a person and changing my life. And that's what they did. And it's really strange to look back now and just see that there and just be like, oh my God, you'd all really and have now played a massive part in me changing my life.
Yeah. So how do you feel nowadays?
Bloody great. Sorry, I've gone out myself.
I'm like, oh, good. Phew.
She's all right.
But also, that's just so cool,
Yeah.
Because I think it's, when you're feeling at the very bottom of, and when you don't know that you've hit rock bottom, but you just feel awful, to know that it's possible to flip things around so much. Sometimes that's all you need, as you say, that hope.
It's hard to put into words how I feel and what's happened, because it's more than just a career change. It's more than just kind of, okay, I'm going to retrain, making the decision to kind of leave an established career that you've worked really hard at in your early to mid 40s when you're not financially stable, has felt huge to me. It might not to other people, but it has to me. And it's an entire change of being and of thinking. I'm a person that's always kind of relied on security through structure and routine and regimentation and security, even if, things, what is security, especially in this day and age? So many things are not secure, but it's this, it's almost like a false security. And to effectively blow that all up and then find an entirely different way of being where you're with a lot of constant uncertainty, a lot of constant juggling. No one day is the same. You don't necessarily have the same kind of structure. So the amount of adaptation isn't just in the physical kind of learning of a new skill. So much of it is adapting how you think and feel and how you manage your life.
Can we just go back a little bit to that moment? You said after those two talks, you fell in love with, the wood carving element of things, and you were like, I don't know how I'm going to make it happen, but it's going to happen. So how did you make that happen?
I think, and this is what I've said to anybody who's kind of said, the same kind of question, or like, how do you do it if they're on, considering something similar? And I think my biggest piece of advice is like, just break it down into bite-sized chunks. If you look at it for all of it, then it feels insurmountable. Like if I looked at it as the full 3 years, finding my tuition fee for those 3 years, financially stabilising myself so that I could still continue to pay my rent at the same time as do a full-time course. If I looked at all the real parts of that to make that a reality, it's just way too big. It feels impossible. And so my sister was like, Jo, she's like, you've got to break it down. She's like, you've just got to break it down. If you get through the first 6 months, you get through the first 6 months, but at least you try and like, you're being true to yourself, like follow that. And yeah, I was really fortunate that I had her. I had my partner, Stuart, who was amazing in supporting me as well. So having a support network around you is really important.
Yeah.
And technically I did it by, City and Guilds have got affiliations with, City and Guilds is a charity.
Yeah.
And they have affiliations with some of the livery companies who offer bursary awards and support to help towards tuition fee. And I couldn't have got through my degree without the help of the Joiners and Ceilers livery company. They helped with parts of my tuition fee throughout my entire 3 years of training. And in my final year, I was awarded a QEST scholarship, which covered my tuition fee, and also I had one-to-one tuition with the Royal School of Needlework to help develop the embroidery, which I then put on my final project. So funding was essential. Because I'd already done a degree, I wasn't eligible for another student loan.
But you'd done a degree 20 years prior?
Yeah, which I'd paid off. Note. Paid off my tuition fees. Thank you very much.
I find that weird. Surely you should be able for, like, or at the very least there should be some rule that if you've paid off the previous one, you should be allowed a new one.
Yeah.
Or if you've never been late for payment or something along those lines.
Yeah.
Because that seems crazy to me that you basically, unless you can find a scholarship or fund it yourself, it's basically like, screw you for evolving as a human being.
Yeah, like tough. Yeah. It's like, funny enough, I don't have 30 grand just tucked in my back pocket. And that's just for the fees.
Yeah, exactly. That's not even the roof over your
yeah,
head or
double that and more for rent and cost of living.
Yeah.
So
City and Guilds and Royal School of Needlework, supported by Joiners and Ceilers and QEST.
Yes.
Wow, what an amazing lineup.
And some of my own savings.
And your savings, and rolling up your sleeves and carrying on working as well for a big part of it, right? Yeah,
so prior to me retraining, I'd been working full-time for a company, and they were extremely supportive, and they offered me kind of contract part-time work around my university hours and coursework. And so I worked evenings, I worked weekends, I didn't stop basically, and I did that for the full 3 years of me training. So, yeah.
Wow.
And I worked all the way, I've worked since I was 15, I've always had a job from when I was 15. So I worked in part-time job all the way through my first degree as well. So, yeah.
I did it the other way around. I was working full-time and then I was studying at Birkbeck in the evenings. And yeah, I was tired by the end. I did it for 3 years. Yeah. So I did a graduate certificate and then part-time masters. Yeah. And when you're carrying on in a career where you're established and you're trying to hold that down at the same time as studying, you really feel the pressure.
Well, there's a big shift, isn't there? Like in my 20s, it's just like, yeah, I can buy a few pints, woo! You know, and just rent was a hell of a lot cheaper where I was living at that point. And now it's like the difference between me paying my rent, it's just like, and it's a hell of a lot different, like doing that in your 40s to your 20s.
Yeah.
So, not that, you know, it's just a reality.
Yeah. But so, City and Guilds, you had a wonderful time there. I mean, obviously not without difficulty, because I know you said it was during the pandemic, so obviously the course had to be adapted, etc. Yeah. But you loved your time there, and it has really like served that purpose of helping you. Yeah.
I mean, I started training in 20, so we were full-blown pandemic. The art school did an incredible job of staying open. I think we only went into 2 lockdown periods, and they shift the criteria, so stuff that we could do at home, we covered in that 3 months, so that we were doing all the technical carving when we were back in the studio. I don't feel like it massively impacted my training in terms of what I learned. And that is down to the dedication of the teachers. First and foremost, you know, the teachers at City and Guilds and the Historic Carving Department over Stone and Wood are all still practicing carvers and artists in their own right. And they are absolutely incredible. I can't say enough to tell you how much I love them, because they, without their love and support and passion, which is what they've got, you know, they go over and above. And that's the difference between someone like me who'd never carved before, ever, going in and then 3 years later managing to come out with what I made, which, by the way, I'm not saying is the best piece of carving on the planet, but, you know, it was a surprise to me. Yeah. You know, if someone would have shown me a picture of that and gone, you'll carve that in 3 years, I probably would have gone, absolutely not. But that is down to the teaching. You know, it is actually all credit to them.
That's amazing. How, and so you're referring to the Rococo mirror, right? The one with the embroidered flowers. So that was your piece for your degree show, right? And I think that's actually how I came across you on Instagram. I think it was either City and Guilds. Yeah, I think it was them who posted it or something like that, or there was something about the degree show, or it was around that time anyway that I came across your profile on Instagram, and it's just such a powerful piece visually, and just also really, you know, you can tell just how many different types of disciplines it brings together. You know, it's got the agglomizé, so gilt glass, you've got the carved frame around it, and then you've got the embroidered flowers. I mean, it's just so compelling as a piece, and you know, I'm seeing it in person for the first time today, but even as a photograph, it's just, you know, I couldn't stop looking at it. It's amazing. But I'd love to know how long it took you to make that.
A long time. So it took me 9 months to make that frame. And one of the things that a lot of people don't always know about the carving practice is that, especially if it's something that is totally new, so it's something that you've designed, we tend to model things in clay before we carve. And that is because it's a lot easier to kind of figure out composition and the design and structure of a piece in clay than it is to do it off the bat out of wood. And you can take all the measurements across. And especially, you know, I think if you've been carving for a long time, there's a lot of people that can probably just go straight to the carving. But you know, when you're learning, that's the way that you're taught. So it took me about 6 weeks, maybe even 8 weeks actually, just to make the clay model. So, because I had to figure out every little bit of it, and I think I must have reworked the entire thing about 5 times, like every bit of it. I remember I had the scroll, which I think is over the right side of it. Initially, it was just dead weedy. It was just a bit rubbish. And my teacher, Takako, came in, and she had worked restoring a lot of Regency and like Rococo style furniture. She's got an incredible eye and is an exceptional carver. And she just kind of took one look at it and she was like, And so she brought to my attention kind of a historical book about the acanthus, and because it has got a formal element to how things like acanthus should be carved. And yeah, it just helped to re-inform and reshape, and I grew and I developed. And then the jellyfish tendril, which is on the lower part of the right side, I attempted to just model that in clay, but it just looked really thick and clunky. And then I actually employed my fashion skills, and I pattern cut the frill and draped it. And then from that, I modelled it in clay, and then from that, I carve it. So when people see it, and it's nice because when people see it, they're like, oh my God, that part's got so much life. And it wouldn't have if I hadn't have done it in the fabric first. So fabric and textiles are embedded in my work, even in ways that people wouldn't see. When you see that, you wouldn't think that I modelled it in fabric first. And yet that was a really integral part of me actually managing to get that looking exactly how it is.
That's amazing. I love that it's the sort of like historic design elements and the fashion elements, like all of that is coming in. That's really cool. So can you just talk us through very briefly, kind of list like all the different materials that you can work in? So you've mentioned wood, embroidery.
Yeah, so I hand embroider. So my nan taught me how to embroider when I was a kid, because she used to embroider and she used to make her own lace as well. And she was a dressmaker. I've got a lot of traditional crafts in my family. My dad was a joiner, carpenter. My granddad was, and my great-granddad was a blacksmith. Like, just a lot of very working class kind of hand skills.
But I love that because that all relates to what you're doing now in some way, shape or form. It's almost like it's in you and then it's kind of burst out.
Yeah, it's just so funny. I mean, I entertain myself with joinery because I'm absolutely useless at it. Like, I can't do anything straight. I can't draw a straight line. I can't cut a straight line. That's why the mirror, you won't find one straight line on that whole thing. Everything's just curved and a bit wonky, just how I like it. And I think when you work with wood, sometimes people think that you can do kind of, cabinet making and like wood turning and stuff like that. And I'm always like, no, I just carve. But sorry, what was?
The different materials that you work in, and you were talking about your family and how that kind of ties in as well. So your grandmother taught you how to embroider. Yeah,
so I've always loved hand embroidery, and I actually find it super relaxing and really soothing. So even days where I'd been in the studio and I'd carved and I was tired, I'd come home and I'd embroider because it'd actually be quite a relaxing thing for me to do.
That makes sense. You're kind of switching from one medium to another.
Yeah.
And then when I was on my way here, you said to me, and I'm picking up some ceramics. And I assumed, because, to me it would make sense that she can't possibly also do ceramics. It must be, I actually thought you were saying that someone else had made ceramics and then you were going to use it as a artistic collaboration with your own project, but it turns out that you made ceramics.
Yes. So as part of the training, as I said, we model everything in clay. But usually the clay just goes in.
I'm just laughing because I'm like, as you do. I'm also referring to the earlier parts where you're like, little Jo thought that she couldn't do fine art or this or that. And I'm like, yeah.
Yeah, no. So that's the look that like my family give me and have given me for like my whole life that I'm just totally oblivious to. And they're like, I think they want to strangle me sometimes. They're like, Joanne! I'm like, what? I can't. Like, you say you can't do one thing one more time. But yeah, we always model in clay, so I got used to kind of working. And I think my brain just works better in 3 dimension, full stop. And so many things make so much more sense now. So when I used to do fashion, I used to really struggle with flat pattern work because it's actually quite mathematical, and it's like a weird jigsaw piece that then has to kind of go from 2D into a 3D object. Whereas if I worked on the stand, I'd get it so much more. So I've just always been more 3D, and I just realised that actually integrating things like ceramics and plaster into my practice. I like the crossover of discipline. I like bringing different elements in, like with the embroidery. So the embroidery kind of idea started because in traditional Rococo you do have quite stylized flowers. And I was also really inspired by a traditional embroidery technique called stump work, which is 3-dimensional embroidery. And I was like, I wonder if you can combine, because why wouldn't you? Carving and embroidery. So the flowers are actually all wood. So every single petal is carved by hand individually that I've then drilled tiny holes into and then embroidered into the wood to create these 3-dimensional. So I've always loved that crossover. And I think with carving, especially carving by hand, it's so labour intensive. It takes me, might take other carvers not as much time. It takes me a long time. I am a slow carver. And so being able to produce things can be quite limiting, and especially things at scale. So actually integrating other materials that I can sculpt and work with into my practice is enabling me to be quite playful for a start, and also to create things that if I would just stick to the practice of just carving alone, I wouldn't necessarily be able to get to in the same, well, I definitely wouldn't be able to get to in the same amount of time. But I'm loving the integration as well.
Yeah. So carving, gilding, éclat-misé, embroidery, ceramics, plaster,
jewellery. Not fine jewellery. Okay. I can do a bit of casting. Bronze, I've done a little bit of bronze.
Right.
Yeah.
We've talked about the Rococo mirror taking you 9 months. Since then you've worked on a chair, is that right?
Yeah.
How long did that take you?
My bonkers chair. Best part of 6 months. So the chair really was, I wanted to take advantage of having the studio space here and make something at scale. And it was the first piece, I'd say, of me really kind of delving into that identity, of me reconnecting with that part of myself that I wanted to show. And so the conception of the chair, as I've mentioned, always comes from a very kind of layered approach, but the chair is called Best Chair, which makes me laugh because I think some people are like, oh God, she's made a piece and she thinks it's so good, she's called it the best. And that isn't actually why it's called that. It's a very tongue-in-cheek response to, in a lot of family homes, we have an item of furniture that is so prized that you're not allowed to use it. And the amount of people that I say it to and straight away they're like, oh my God, I had a chair like that. Someone said it the other day and they were like, oh my God, our chair was called the winter chair and no one was allowed to sit. And I was like, exactly that. And it's, you know, effectively you take an item that is functional and you make it totally non-functional by this kind of heightening of this prized value. And so I wanted to play with that and you know, what's more ridiculous than taking a chair and making it into a 17th century Dutch tulipier vase? Because if you're going to do it...
might as well do it properly.
Go all out.
But I love that, you're right. It's like in every household, there's always, it could be a chair or it could be like grandma's china or like whatever it is. But everyone, I think every family has that like one item that's like too good to use and that must be like preserved. And then you're like, why the hell do we have it if we're not using it? But anyway, so you made a Dutch tulipier chair.
I did. Yeah, because if you're going to do it, really go for it. And so the chair is non-functional, funnily enough. And the reason why I referenced kind of the Dutch tulipier is because the golden era of Dutch masters is incredibly influential to me, not only in terms of carving. It's, you know, the birthplace and time of Grinling Gibbons, but also it was a phenomenal period for female artists. So there's two in particular that I was drawn to, which was Rachel Ruysch, who I think you pronounce Rocaille Ruysch. I apologise for my pronunciation, and Clara Peters. And Rachel was just the most incredible still life artist. I actually came across her work in the Kelvin Grove Museum in Glasgow. I was struck by it so much. And I've seen a lot, obviously, of still life and Dutch masters, but I was struck by her painting so much, like I was just mesmerised. And it was only afterwards that I realised that it was by a woman. So it wasn't, I don't select this work just because it happens to have made by a woman. It's because I was really drawn to it for its level of detail and its finesse and its composition. And I learnt more about her, and I learnt that she was actually extremely prolific and very well sought after. She was actually more profitable than Rembrandt during their lifetime. And she was celebrated for over 100 years after she passed away. And it's only relatively recent history that have left her out of the history books, like so many other women artists. And yeah, I wanted to kind of pay tribute to the beauty that I find within her work, and I wanted to find a way of connecting that with my carving. And so, unlike the mirror and other projects that I've done where I've modelled in clay and then transferred that information over to a carving, I actually carved every single tulip from a block of wood with nothing other than Rachel's paintings on my wall. So I didn't model it, I did a few kind of quick sketches, and it was just me and the wood. And it's what we call free carving, and I just carved.
Wow.
And so every tulip on the chair the 7 of them is unique. And this is really, it feeds back into the integrity of my practice. There are ways of speeding up the carving process. You know, technology is advancing at a phenomenal rate. You do have things like CNC machines and milling machines and what have you. And obviously a wide variety of power tools. And the position that I'm in is I'm not judgmental of anyone who wants to use whatever it is to produce your work. Like, my only stance is there is space for all of us. So if I want to choose to produce work by hand, it would be nice to feel that there is still space and respect and appreciation for that. I'm not anti anybody involved in technology. It's just not something I want to do.
Yeah.
Because, and I know this sounds incredibly romantic, but wood has had a life. It's been alive. It's a living material. It's been a living material. You know, every piece of wood is as unique as our own fingerprints. Like, it's all got its own grain. It's all got its own feeling, its direction, its quirks. When you work wood by hand, it tells you kind of where it wants to go. Sometimes you'll have a bit of a battle with it. That's real fun. Like, but other times it will almost kind of guide you where it wants to go. You have this kind of tension. It's like a collaboration between you and the material, and that's very special to me. That's very special to me, especially with my passion for nature and respect for it. I only use wood that has been sourced by naturally felled trees. I don't use farm wood. And so, yeah, it's important for me to have that relationship with the material and to employ the skills that are time-honoured, that are precious to work the wood. So, yeah, I carved everyone just freely, and I just kind of let them shine in their own little abundance.
What does that feel then, you know, when you compare to the fashion world where you're saying that the design process was being squeezed out and like time was of the essence constantly, and then now you're engaging in these processes that just take so much time, you know, whether it's the carving or the embroidery, you know, all of it really, it's just really time intensive. Is that intentional?
It is. It doesn't, obviously, it doesn't make for an easy existence, I wouldn't say, because, you know, the system that we live under, time is such a commodity, speed is such a commodity, production is such a commodity. You know, these are very real standards of what can be achieved, and I feel what is measured as success. And so when you choose to work things by hand, which is very time intensive, you know, the price that then you have to charge for these items is a lot. And sometimes I think there's a disconnect between people understanding the value of that. And I find it really interesting because, you know, a lot of people wouldn't kind of bat an eye at kind of paying a standard day rate for someone like a carpenter or a plumber. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I could quote a carving based on a similar day rate and it would make people's eyes water. And I think the difference is it's between things that provide a function over things that are seen as a decorative kind of surplus.
You said that to me about the difference between stone carving and wood carving a little bit in terms of how funds are prioritised, perhaps, right?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think if you're working by hand in stone or wood, neither's an easy gig.
No.
But I think there's more opportunity from my limited knowledge. I'm still fairly new to this industry, so you know, I appreciate there's people that probably have a lot more in-depth knowledge than I do, but from my observation I would say that there seems to be more opportunity in stone carving, and I think that's because there's more figurative work that's commissioned in stone. I also think there's more architectural work that is exterior.
And so that's where the function aspect comes in,
yeah.
Right? Like you know, if you're the National Trust or English Heritage or something and you've got limited funds, you're going to go to the roof, the structure, what's literally holding up the building.
Yeah. Rather than, you know, like just a purely ornamental kind of piece on the interior that might be wood. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think there is probably a little bit more space in stone, and also stone. I mean, it depends what type of stone. It depends the size of the job. There's so many variables, but you know, certain stones, like softer stones that are worked by hand, the speed tends to be a bit faster than being able to carve in wood. Wood seems to be a bit slower.
Fine.
And with wood as well, it's the constant upkeep of the chisels. Like your sharpening is a huge part, and you're consistently kind of having to make sure that you're sharpening, and you have a lot more chisels.
How often are you sharpening?
It really depends. It depends on what wood you're using. If the wood's a lot harder, then you know you might find that you need to sharpen a lot more frequently. So something like oak or walnut in comparison to lime or pine. But you know you're consistently kind of stropping, I tend to hone my edges, so not full kind of resharpening, but just hone on kind of a light, a fine grit stone, probably like once a week for the ones that I use quite consistently.
Right.
Because I like to keep my edges like super sharp as well. Sharpening in itself is really time consuming because you know I've got like over 100 chisels in stone. A lot of stone carvers will have like a selection of maybe 5, and that'll be like their core set, and they'll have some specialist ones, but you know it's quite a tight amount, and obviously again dependent on the type of stones that you're using, but you don't need to sharpen them quite as often. So
right, so time is really like at the core of what you do.
Time is everything, it really is, and it does feel challenging for sure, because I have got the very real restraints of having to pay rent and live in, you know, the structure of a capitalist society that we live in. That's non-negotiable. That is exactly what it is. But I don't want, you know, in a way, I don't want that to inform my artistic practice. I've lived my life doing that, and I didn't change it. I didn't go through everything that I've gone through. I'm not going through everything that I'm going through to end up in the same position. I find, you know, the art world is changing. It's constantly changing. It's constantly evolving. And I know it might sound very puritanical and romantic, but I need there to be space for me to allow myself to create from a very pure, unfiltered, unrestrained way. And, you know, if the reality is that I'll always work doing, you know, bits and pieces on the side to sustain that, I'm happy with that. If that's what my life will look like, then I'm okay with that. I'd rather it be that way at the expense of me having to compromise this thing that feels very precious and very meaningful to me. So yeah.
But you have found a client, right? You've got your first commission at the moment?
I have. So, yeah, I am working on a lovely job at the moment, which is more in line with kind of a traditional carving job.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm carving 3 kind of panels. And yeah, it's exactly the type of thing that I still enjoy doing. So even though the pieces that I've been making, especially in this last year, and finding my own kind of creative direction for my work, even though that's been integral and really important and will continue to be, it's nice to have paid commissions that are coming in, honouring the more kind of traditional aspects of the carving.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm never at my happiest than when I'm carving, which again kind of relates back to why I choose to do it by hand. If I take away that, I'm taking away the bit that I love. That's why I do it, because nothing makes me happier. Like, nothing makes me happier than when I've got my chisels and I'm just carving. It's bliss.
That makes me so pleased, pleased for you to hear that you've found your way, found your voice, and that these organisations have been there to support you, help you along the way, and also now that you're finding clients with whom that message is resonating and who that there's an appetite for the skills that you're offering. So that's really exciting. I'd love to hear a little bit more about what you've got coming up. You've got you've got an exciting show on the horizon.
I do. So yeah, it's been a really busy start to the year, which has been fantastic. So as part of the Sarabande group, we've got our gallery arm, if you like, called House of Bandits. So we've been doing a pop-up in Selfridges, which started kind of a couple of weeks ago and will run till the end of March. And then I'll actually be taking part in a group show at the Saatchi gallery, which starts on the 11th of Feb, and that's on for a couple of months as well. And the show is called Flowers in Contemporary Art and Culture. It's going to be quite a big exhibition. It will span across photography, fashion and the visual arts. And so yeah, I'm exhibiting a couple of pieces within that show, which is, yeah, it's a pinch me moment. I still can't quite believe it myself. I'm like, what?
That's amazing. I'm so glad that such positive things are coming to you, and yeah, it's wonderful.
It's early days. Like I said, I'm a year and a half out of graduating. I'm finding my feet very much. I'm just taking it one bit at a time, because that's all you can do. It is a bit of a challenging climate at the moment, producing art, but art matters, and I think I'm just excited to be in the position that I'm in. I'm very grateful to be in the position that I'm in. And yeah, I keep on also contributing by working with kind of community groups and charitable projects. That's really important to me. So the balance between my art practice and that is a good place to be.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. And so final question from me. I always love to end on this one, to sort of end on a high. What commission would you love to get in the future?
Oh my goodness. I mean, when I was in my first year in City and Guilds, there was a competition for emerging carvers run by the Grindon Gibbons Tercentenary. And I produced a lace lobster piece for that. And part of the research for that looked at, again, it's so funny looking at it now, given where I am, but it was looking at Alexander McQueen's collection, where he commissioned Paul Ferguson to carve a pair of prosthetic legs for Amy Mullins, who walked the runway. And they are beautiful pieces. And I loved that crossover of fashion and carving, and you know, again, that this is kind of my world. So yeah, I'm seeing like there's a lot of designers who are integrating kind of traditional craftsmanship techniques within their ranges. I mean, a dream would be, I'd love to do something with Schiaparelli, because that is right up my street. Or Sarah Burton, who's now gone to Givenchy. Sarah's a huge inspiration to me. You know, I'd love to work with someone like Shona Heath. I'd love to produce.
So how would that work? What would you do? Would it be like almost like a skirt that could be
anything.
Like embroidered? Okay.
It could be anything.
I mean, the thing is, if you'd asked me before today, can clothing be made of wood? I would have said no. But having spoken to you now for an hour, I'm thinking, yeah, I'm sure you'd find a way.
Oh, I would. I definitely would. I've definitely already got ideas. I love what's the word?
Repurposing?
Yes, thank you. I love that idea. Reimagining.
Yes.
Something, you know, those lanes of how we perceive certain things. You know, we think of wood carving or even stone carving, and I think, you know, especially when you live in European historic cities, you know, you only need to look up at any given day, and there's carvings as an ornate kind of historical ornament that we're surrounded by, and I think your eye almost gets used to it and get almost like a bored effect. Like there's almost a boredom. It's like, oh yeah, you know. Because it just becomes so commonplace that you detach from, one, what it is, and two, what it's actually meant to actually do that and the skill that it takes. And so I think, you know, when we talk about carving, there's still a notion of people just thinking about it in that context. And I think that's where I want to really kind of disrupt in a way, and be like, actually, there's so much more that we can do with it. There's so much more. And who, you know, exactly what you said, who'd think, actually, could you do a garment in wood? Well, yeah, I'd love to try. You know, it's that world that, you know, I'd love to be a part of. And I'd love to work on, you know, public commissions as well. I'd love my work to be in places that is accessible to the many, and for it to be appreciated. You know, I'd love to do a piece and dedicate it to the city where I'm from, for Liverpool.
That's really cool. Well, I hope that happens.
So do I. That'd be nice.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Thank you so much. This has been really inspiring. I didn't quite expect to go on the roller coaster of emotions I went on.
You're welcome.
Jo is currently taking part in a group show at the Saatchi Gallery called Flowers, which is on until 5th of May. I hope you'll get a chance to see her work there. Thank you for watching. It means a lot, especially as at the moment this channel is entirely self-funded. So please spread the word. Like, comment and subscribe. See you next week.
Do you want to be closer, don't you? Not creepy.
Outtake number 1000.